Hello, everyone. I think we're about to get started here. We want to make sure we get you an hour of programming or close to. I guess it'll be about 50 minutes. But my name is Laura Newton Boujou. I am from the Lakudere Band of Ojibwe, which is in Wisconsin. And I've been working in the field of Indian child welfare for over 20 years. And at the Minneapolis American Indian Center for 18 years, which is crazy for me to think about. I am the Family Services Director at the Minneapolis American Indian Center. I am also a Ojibwe person, and I am very proud to work in my community and be part of the work that I'm doing in and around the field of child welfare. So I'm just glad to be here with all of you today. I'm going to be helping to moderate the conversation, but also answering some of the questions because I had a staff member that has a family emergency. So I'm going to be stepping in her place. And I'm going to introduce the rest of our panel. So, or actually have them introduce themselves. So next up we have Nina.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nina Vongpeth. I currently work with Hennepin County as a community engagement specialist. However, I did just step out of my role at Ramsey County as an ICWA child protection worker as well. And I'm originally from the Lower Sioux Indian community here in Minnesota.
Bonjour, Ginoa, Ombashi Beneshik, Indigo, Baga Aduaning and Dujaba, Makwan Dudem. I go by Ombaji, Ombaji Guernsey. I work at DIW as a cultural home educator. I work with mothers and, their families struggling with substance use disorder and cultural programming.
Hello, everybody. That's it? That's all I get from you all? Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Let's see. Oh my God, you guys. Good afternoon. See, we're getting there. Welcome to the room. Welcome to the room, right? One of the things I'm always sort of teasing my students when I'm teaching large classes, it's like, everybody's always distracted doing all these other things, right? And you have to do this sort of like ritual to sort of like, welcome to the room. Now let's do this education, right? Because it's, one of the things I always think is like, teaching is about ceremony, right? You're exchanging information, we're talking together, we're learning, we're growing together, right? So Nick Metcalf, I am a professor in the social work department and also do consulting work in child welfare around systems change. So one of the things I'm working with Aaliyah in, it's sort of interesting, in Wisconsin on one of their initiatives, and there's some child welfare transformations happening in one of the counties. And so I'm an evaluator and a planner. So I do that on the side so I can afford my habit of teaching. It's a nasty habit.
All right. Well, as I stated before, we're here to talk about culture today. Specifically Native American culture and why it's important in all of the work that we do with our families, whether it be doing a case plan with a family, working with a young mom that is new to parenting and is wanting to learn about different parenting techniques and traditional parenting techniques. And so we're here today to just answer questions, but also to just give you a general overview. So I hope that you'll participate and you'll raise your hand and ask a question. There's not a lot of opportunities that you get to, to just blanketly ask Native folks like, hey, I just want to know this. Is this something that's appropriate? We really want you to ask those questions, so please feel free to do so. That's why we're up here today. That being said, we want to talk about culturally based work with families. And I'm going to ask our panel a few questions and have them go ahead and explain a little bit more about what they do with families. So one of the questions that I have for you is, what is one way that you can add cultural goals and connections into case planning? So if you were talking to a social worker, what's a suggestion that you would have for them? Do you want to start, Nina?
Yeah, I think, in regards to this question, I think it's really important to really ask the person that you're working with who they are and get those strengths from them directly. It's really important to highlight the things that they're already doing as strengths and just highlight those and include those on the case plan. I think it's typical for a case plan to be generated like overall, this is what we do. So if there is substance use, attend this treatment program, get a Rule 25 and follow the recommendations. And so sometimes when we do things in that way, creating those case plans, we create and give them something that they're not going to be in compliance with. So the one thing I like to do is figuring out what they're already doing so we can incorporate that into it so that they're compliant in the beginning with their case plan. And then, you know, being able to adjust on that case plan, what are they doing? I know one specific family I was working with, it was a recommendation for chemical health assessment. And the truth was, you know, we might not see her through a whole substance use program. So what are other ways that we can be creative in supporting her so that she can be successful with the case plan? Because she had great communication with me as her worker. And she, you know, was willing to do other things on the case plan to reunify with her children. So I think it's really important to pull from what they're already doing and add those onto the case plan, instead of just creating something that's very generic for the rest of people.
I'd like to piggyback now, but just listening to what she had to say. Usually when I get approached on how to help people and, you know, they're doing the case plan and, you know, the goal activity, you know, it's not just about addressing their chemical use or whatever. It's like, why do they feel the need to do that? How is that person? How is their family? How do they have an understanding of how they got there? You know, it's breaking that survival that many of our families and including ourselves, you know, had to, you know, find for ourselves to come back and help, to come back and give who we are. I feel like we have a service as their relatives, not just community people, but you know, our role that we took on to be helpers with them to figure out what do they need to show up for their families and themselves. I've been a case manager, I've been a group facilitator, I've been all sorts of different titles, but basically I just show up as me and give what I need. So a little story of mine is I have you know, many people of different ages that struggle with substance use at very, very young ages, and you know, that doesn't always make sense to them. So I have one young lady, 17 years old. She was kicked out of her house for bringing things into her home, and she came to our program for help when everything was turned away, and we took her out fasting, and in those 4 days, you know, before that, she was on me for everything. I had to be with her all the time. Ombaji this, Ombaji that, you know, like she wanted the answers for me, and I don't have answers for anybody. You know, you gotta go get those yourself. So when she was out there, you know, it broke that survival in her. And now she doesn't need me for nothing, man. I don't even hear from her anymore. But it's all about building them up and recognizing that, you know, they deserve to be who they are, and they should have support. You know, like it goes beyond just a case plan to me. I mean, everybody deserves to feel home, especially our people, because this is all we got.
How many people in here are social workers? Went to school for social work? So you all know about being culturally competent, right? You all should remember that, right? You're supposed to be culturally competent social workers. This is part of our code of ethics and it's our practice, right? And so, I mean, for me, it really is about meeting the clients where they're at, right? And oftentimes one of the things, what I've learned over the years is that, you know, Indigenous folks are at various stages in terms of grappling with their cultural identity and their tribal identity, right? So we're talking about assimilation and genocide and those sorts of things, because we exist within a historical context. One of the things I always tell folks, it's like, it was 1978 before we could practice our spirituality openly, right? 1998 before we got full freedom to do that, right? And we are still in this fight about sort of recognition at a tribal level. So we, one of the things I always say is too, is that, boarding schools are real, right? And they are still in existence. And you are dealing with populations who are dealing with boarding school trauma as well as part of the relocation, right? So we live in the Twin Cities area, the urban area, and relocation was part of our sort of evolution here, right? And so you're talking about several generations of folks who are sort of grappling with and trying to reconnect to culture and to who we are as tribal people. And so one of the things is that, as a client presents themselves, right, the questions are, it's like, who are you? What tribe are you? Right? Gives me sort of a sense about what nation they are. And for me as a practitioner, it's like, what do I know about this tribe? Right? I have my students who are working at one of the seminars at American Indian Family Center, and it's like, what tribal nations exist here in Minnesota? That's one basic level, right? Anishinaabe, and you have Dakota folks, and you have Ho-Chunk folks. One of the things in the city, the Minneapolis Public Schools, I believe they had served something like over 120 different tribes, right? But the big catch-all is Anishinaabe and Dakota folks. So if you get some familiarity with those cultures, you'll begin to understand what types of connections you can have and begin to offer some framework. And one of the things too, if there's cultural connections you are looking for, the way to do those is getting involved in community, right? You'll get to know who the helpers are, the healers are, and asking folks, the more you show up, the more Indigenous folks trust you, right? Because if you're coming from outside the community and we never see you, why would I give you any information, right? Because we're dealing with a lot of sort of exploitation and sort of co-opting of cultural identity. And if you remember this, culture matters. And the more Indigenous folks are connected to who they are culturally, the better health outcomes you will have. The more connections an Indigenous person has to their culture, the better health outcomes they have. I mean, look in the literature, it continues to show you that we have increased self-efficacy, self-esteem, spirituality, less depression, right? Because one of the things in culture really does contain a lot of those ways of life and the ways of taking care of ourselves and the stories that are important to us. And so as you think about that, right? So there's a process of discernment working with your clients. What do you know? What are you able to sort of like engage your clients with? And what is that activity that you can work with them on? And one of the things I always tell my, when I was working in child welfare, was to tell staff, it's like, get to know the agencies, know who you're talking to, know them personally, so that when you do a referral, it's a call, right? You should never send a, I always say, is never send a client someplace that you haven't been to and personally know yourself, right? Because that's not fair to clients to sort of do that heavy lifting for them. Your task is to do that for them, right?
Thank you so much. I think what I would like to add to that is just having practiced as a tribal liaison, working with tribes outside of the state of Minnesota. There are so many resources that are out there. I mean, luckily we have the internet and it's, it's gotten so much better where there are really a wealth of different books, but if you don't know where to start, like, start locally. There are, we have a wonderful bookstore here in Minneapolis called Birch Bark Books. But there's a lot of different places like that. I mean, I think just starting with the community agencies and spending time with community agencies will help anyone in their work because you'll get to know who the staff are, attending cultural events in the community, helps you familiarize yourself with what protocols there are, how you should be respectful in different situations, and just what is happening around the community. All of that's really important. And I liked what Nick had to say, and so I would echo that, is to really meet, each individual where they are. So, some folks will have been adopted and maybe have not had a lot of exposure to their own culture and are really seeking that. Others will be in a survival mode and be worried about where am I sleeping, when am I going to see my children next, when is the next thing happening? And just having that conversation with one another and sharing something of yourself. This is one thing I always tell students. It's so important to be appropriate, but share something about yourself as a social worker if you expect to get anything in return, especially in our community. If you're from the state of Wisconsin or Oregon or whatever, let your client know something about you, because you're asking them to share some very deep and personal information with someone that they have no idea. And so just something about your family, something about you helps break that ice and is really important. And culturally, I think that's what we do as Native people. The first thing that we do when we meet another Native person is greet them and say, where are you from? Who's your family? And who do we know in common? And all of those sorts of things. That in and of itself really goes a long way, because people really, I think, gravitate towards that. And whenever I work with students, that's one of the things that I tell them is to, don't be afraid to tell something about yourself, because people need to form that connection and know like that you're a person. And so cultural goals, I think, like you said, they can be very varied, but I think it's important to put them into things like case planning, because we have so many of our relatives that have experienced a loss of culture. And in my 20 plus years of experience, the thing that I have seen that helps people the most is when they gain access to that and they start to learn more about their tribal culture, their heritage, when they make connections in community, friends, sober friends. All of those things are like the thing that gets them to the point of being healthy and being able to care for their children in the way that they want to. All of that is really the key. And our families crave it. And that's what I would say, if I can speak for folks, is that they want more than anything, is to just know more about themselves and who they are as a people and who they are as a person. And one of the things that I am lucky to get to do is to observe every Monday our women that come in that are pregnant or have recently delivered a child and who have struggled with substance use. And so I get to really see over the course of like a year or more the progress that folks make. And some of the best things that I get to see are, children, babies learning right alongside their moms. Because a lot of times, someone might come in and say, I don't really know anything about being Ojibwe. And the first thing we say is like, that's okay. That is the case for lots of people, and there's no shame in that. And we are here to help you get connected. We want to do cultural teachings. And what's great is their child learns right alongside them. So we have, young children that are a year old that, start singing when the drum starts, and they just learn these things by watching. And it's so amazing to see firsthand. So anything else regarding that question?
I think I just had one quick addition to that, is that in regards to cultural goals, I think sometimes our families don't realize that cultural activities or cultural ceremonies can be included in a case plan. And so for those of us that are professionals, to really encourage and ask if they are engaged in those activities, because I think, like I said earlier, people are thinking more typical of treatment programs or mental health classes or something, but they might be helping out at Sweat Lodge every week or once a month, or could be engaged in a beading class or a ribbon skirt making class or something, or those courses or classes may be offered which can also show productivity for our families to engage in. And I think they need that encouragement and that validation that some of those activities that they're engaged can be used.
So the next question I have is, what is a culturally responsive practice? So it's something that you hear the term in social work a lot. If any of you want to jump in and say, what would you consider a culturally responsive practice?
So it's where you start from, right? One of the things, and when I'm teaching comparative, I'm always encouraging my white students to get in touch with their sort of past, right? Because one of the things is that you do have history, you do have trauma, you do have a lot of things that have occurred throughout your lifetime and that you've learned, right? Because we didn't just fall out of trees, right? In terms of the way we developed. And so, you know, like, who are your people, right? I know for myself, I'm mixed. You know, I'm white, I'm Sichango Oyate, and I'm African American, right? But immediately that challenged you because suddenly it was like, oh, right? So you made an immediate assessment about my identity because I present very much as a Native person, right? And so you begin to sort of get challenged in terms of your own assumptions. And so one of the things I always say, culture is sort of that sort of medium in which we operate. And we are operating through an American system. And what is one of the things about American sort of ideology is that it's individualism, right? It's engagement with the sort of economy, right? Acquisition of wealth means what? I have my own car, I have my own apartment, I can go on vacation, I can sort of save for retirement. When you ask an indigenous person about wealth, they will tell you something very different, right? They will tell you about a connection to culture, a connection to language, and a connection to ceremony. So wealth is defined differently in those sort of practices. And so one of the things in the process of, as you're looking at your client and you're sort of saying, why don't they have a job? You need to ask them, is it important to you to make this amount of money, right? Because one of the things I always think is part of our work in social work is that we're often doing is colonizing our clients, right? We're not accepting our clients from where they're at because not all our clients want to be wealthy. That's an assumption, right? And quit digging in poor people's pockets and spending their money, right? We tend to do that. It's like, you shouldn't have bought that. It's like, no, right? Step back. That's joy for them. If I need to sort of spend $200 and get my hair braided, right? That's my business, right? You don't get to decide how I sort of allocate my resources. You get to sort of, we get to have this conversation about what's important to me. So culturally responsiveness for me is always about understanding where culturally your clients are at. I really resist the urge, you know, even though I work in the academy, to sort of have my students sort of subsume their cultural identity, right? I have a lot of Somali students, I have a lot of Hmong students. And so one of the things I'm always saying, this is what's important. Always maintain that and learn how to sort of interact with the sort of broader system and help clients learn how to be cultural translators in the sort of life that they live, right? One of the things too is like the value judgment about like families living 2 to 3 generations deep in an apartment. That's intergenerational living. That's knowledge transmission, right? That's cultural teachings that are happening at home on any given time. And one of the things you may ask your client is like, are you okay living with 3 families deep? I mean, I did it when I first moved here, right? I loved it because there was always cooking, there was always childcare, there was always people around, and we had a great time, right? And then as people moved away and became more individual in having their own spaces, then it became much more work to begin to sort of connect with family, right? So I always say, understand what culture is, but first you also need to understand what your culture is, right? Who are you? That's one of the things when I teach students, like my first question when I walk in the classroom, like, who are you? What do you mean? Who are you? Answer that question. And then they're like, well, what? They want to sort of know more. And I'm like, What you write down in terms of who you are tells me a lot more about you and what value systems you have, right? Because if you say, oh, right, I'm a daughter, I'm a cousin, I'm a community member, I'm a pipe carrier, right? I'm a cultural keeper, I'm a storyteller. That tells you a sort of a different sort of a understanding about who I am. So I always say, start with who you are first, because that's when you begin to see what culture looks like from other people's perspective. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So that's cultural responsiveness, right? So, and one of the things for me is always like, don't colonize, right? Stop colonizing clients. And right, and sort of one of the things is like, look at culture as an asset and a rich source of information and sort of a life force for clients, right? And help them negotiate the systems as they are, right? Because one of the things I always think to myself is like, we have to be cultural translators in our work, right? We have to teach people, I can still be an indigenous person and be successful in white America, right? But nobody teaches you the sort of process that occurs, right? When you're moving from being in poverty to middle class and to upper middle class, that's a cultural experience, right? The first time I went to sort of a really nice restaurant and everybody was ordering wine, I was like, oh no, I've never really ordered wine before, right? So I ordered white Zinfandel. And any wine sort of tasters know that's like dirty water, right? That's like crap. You might as well just ask for the bottom of a bucket, right? I was like, I didn't know. I had heard somebody say it in some movie or something, right? But everybody was like, wow, you should pair this with that. And you would, I was like, no, like, what do you mean? I'm not a drinker like that. Or even food, even the way food is presented, right? I mean, one of the things when you go to a really nice restaurant, you have to eat before you go. What the hell is that about? I don't understand that, right? Because they don't serve much. The portions are like this big, right? And I'm like, what the hell? I'm hungry. I want this big. But nobody teaches you about those cultural changes that occur, right? Even handling of money, right? When you pull money together at being poor, there's an understanding, right? When I was going through my hard time, I learned more from people who were accessing food shelves and going to congregate dining about the system than I did from my social workers. Because my social workers knew nothing about the systems because they were not living that life and figuring out, you know, even with your bus transfer, you get 2.5 hours between, and you're trying to line it up so that you can get to 2 stops before it runs out, right? Anybody else had to clean out a couch before? Come on now, right? Yeah, see, right? Even sort of one of the things too is that shame about like even how we've sort of come from one place to another place, right? We're all on a journey. And so I always think about like culturally responsiveness is really sort of understanding who you are first fundamentally, where you're going and how you're helping clients get along the way they're getting along.
Thank you. Bazi or Nina, did you have anything to add to that?
Right, we're still on 2, right?
Yes.
With culture responsive practice. Just listening. I mean, I can relate to lived experiences. I mean, like I met so many people, even today. I was a part of their orgs, whether I was a child in the group home of Anda Young or, you know, a staff member working with the youth on the street. I feel it's very beneficial for them not to only see somebody from where they're from that lived how they lived, but to not only doing good, but being good, having that good heart still, knowing how to put myself back in that place because it wasn't too long ago before I was in one of those beds at one of those freaking programs. So culturally responsive practices, when I used to run a safe harbor program for MIWRC, I used to have Brittany's place, amazing women over there, they're non-white, but still they knew that something was lacking. So, you know, I was called when they had native children in there just for a visit. These kids just wanted something familiar. And I seen good impacts from them. You know, sometimes they just wanted to roll with me and I'm like, all right, you're with me today. And they would be the best helpers. It didn't matter if they're not from my tribe and stuff. They freaking believed everything and they were thirsty for it. And so we just, I don't know, man, like Nick said, just build those connections. You know, there's good people everywhere, but be careful because not just because you're American Indian, you know, and you feel like oh, there's an Indian person, I gotta ask them. We don't all like a lot of us don't believe in that stuff. I mean, like I have grandparents that have trauma with our culture, so you know, like you gotta find those people, but they'll know those people, but you know, don't just say like, oh, can't find anybody, I give up.
Nina, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think the thing that's coming to mind is my experience with my leadership who really help keep me in a culturally responsive manner. I had experience working for the county, and so a lot of times that colonization comes out and that idea of safety for the kids, you kind of go back and forth with this assessment of that, right? Like, are these kids safe? You know, should I be more aggressive? And I think I was fortunate enough to have leadership to really talk with me in those moments when I wasn't sure about that and what I needed to do. And because they're rooted in being culturally responsive and having respect and understanding for our people and where we've come from and our history, that we don't want to condemn our families today for coming and living out of that. And I think that was, it's important to have that in those reminders and those spaces where you can talk about that and where you can come to just to say that, okay, I have this thought or this concern, and what, you know, having that guidance come from them to tell you how can we navigate that. And I think one thing with our community and I would say overall in all child protection is being creative. You need to be creative in how you can respond to what's happening or respond to what you're hearing is happening. And I think the more creative we are, the better the solutions that can come out of that. And there can be more solutions offered versus removing children or making it a more traumatic experience. So I think, I just thank my leadership for having that capability and being grounded in that and having the fight for our culture and our people.
Thank you. I think the next question that we have is, what are some best practice for collaborating with American Indian organizations or tribes? So connecting and collaborating, not just telling an agency what you would like them to do or sending an email, but what are some active efforts, some practices that you all have seen that have worked well, or what hasn't worked well? Anyone want to start? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. Hey, everybody, how are you? So one of the things I always think about, so one of the things about culture, right, is that one of the things I think people have a tough time whenever they come into the American Indian community is the fact that American Indian knowledge is transmitted through storytelling and showing, right? And so if you sort of are trained in Western education, which we've gone through K through 12, it's passive learning, right? I'm sitting up here, I'm telling you, I'm sort of showing up as the expert. You retain that information and as long as you regurgitate it, you do great, right? So one of the things that's very different for folks whenever they come into the community, because it's like immediately you show up wanting to know, it's like, well, what did they mean? They just told a story. Why didn't they just tell me what to do? No, the what to do part is your discernment and your process. If you've watched everything that was happening, you would see if you were successful or not. Does that make sense? Yay? Nay? I was looking all the way back up there. Did you really fall asleep? But then it's one of those things. It's kind of like, so you know, whenever people come into the American Indian community, I always say it's like, you have to be willing to sort of be educated in a different way. And you can ask clarifying questions, right? And even whenever sort of somebody hands you sage, right? And it's like, what do I do with that? You just follow the person in front of you or the person before that, right? Or if somebody offers you and says, well, do you have a skirt? Right? Well, I have an extra skirt. You know, the protocol in this particular ceremony requires that you wear a skirt and show up in that way. Right? This is not the time to talk about sort of feminism or sort of like, right? We can have those big conversations later outside of ceremony, right? But then one of the things I always think is like, you know, as you're working with organizations, remember organizations, American Indian organizations are under-resourced, right? And overworked. Should I say it again? They're under-resourced and overworked. And they're often asked to do the heavy lifting for you, right? In order for you to come work with an American Indian organization, right? We're often asked to do the translation so that you understand it in ways that you can hear us, right? Instead of you coming to an American Indian organization and figuring out and doing your own background research about what the history of the organization, which tribal nations they're serving, and the history of those nations. So when you show up, we can have sort of a common understanding. Does that make sense? And one of the things too, I remember when I worked at Hennepin County, one of the things that used to always drive me crazy was that come to learn what not everybody, I mean, in child welfare, were social workers. I always made the assumption that everybody was a social worker, right? They're not required to be social workers, right? So that level of understanding was different. And most of the workforce at that time were mostly white women. And most of the workforce did not live in the city. They lived in suburbia. So for them to understand working in community, right, was much more difficult, right? Because they often heard the stories about, oh, don't go down Franklin Avenue. The South Minneapolis is bad. It's like, I freaking live in the South Minneapolis, right? It's not that bad. Don't do stupid things, right? Right? And that's how this goes, right? But then having to sort of work with the workforce that is not from the community, knows nothing about the community, nor is willing to even meet the community where they're at, makes it much more difficult. And again, under-resourced and overworked, and trying to sort of get you to work with us. Change that paradigm.
I think one of the things that has been a really great collaboration is what we have here today, which is our Metro Urban Indian Director Subcommittee, which involves Native organizations, county professionals, attorneys. One of the things that's been great about that and that I really appreciate is when we have workers from outside of the Native agencies come and just say like, just put me to work. I'm just coming to volunteer for the day, you know, when we have a large event like this. Honestly, that's the best way to really get, one, to get to know people, but also to get to know like what all of the things are that they do. So one of the things I think that is a little tricky is in a lot of our Native organizations, many of us are, you know, wearing many different hats all the time. So we're doing advocacy for families, but we might also be on some day going to the legislature because we need to advocate, you know, for some legislation. Or we are putting together a toy drive or Thanksgiving baskets or all of those kinds of things. One of the things that I think is a great suggestion is when you see those things happening in the community, like call up and say like, hey, can we bring a few workers over? Can we just come help out for the day? Because that's the best way to form those collaborative efforts and to get to see from like the flip side of the coin, you know, what is happening on any of those days. And what's been great about MUID Family Preservation is that's kind of what we do just in our small group, is everybody just helps out, everybody pitches in and, you know, and we plan these activities. One great collaborative effort that I saw that, you know, in practice before is is when I worked with a few workers who were really great at connecting foster parents with parents that were the birth parents. And some of the best collaborative meetings that I've ever been to actually occurred at a foster parent's house. Lovely foster parent that was willing to always open their home. And so, you know, we would have the mother who was working to reunify with her children be there at the meeting. So those of you that have done this work know, you know, every month or twice a month or whatever, you're going out to a home, you're learning all about what's been happening with a child or children during that past month. And one thing that's always driven me crazy is like the parent needs this information. So they should be here at the table if at all possible. So it was great because the parent was there. We were hearing things from them that had happened at visits. We were hearing things from the foster mom. They were connecting. All the workers were there, the guardian ad litem. And it was just such a better experience for the children because they could see everyone around on the table was there for them. They could connect with everyone at once. They didn't have to say, oh yeah, we have to wait to get a hold of so-and-so. Everyone was there and folks showed up all the time because they saw that collaborative effort. So it was just a really, I think, a great experience. And it was so nice for the family because luckily, you know, and I think there are programs that are doing this more where they're trying to connect our parents that are working towards reunification with foster parents or relative caregivers to make sure that they're getting the same information at the same time and, you know, going to doctor's appointments together if they can, and doing those things rather than having them try to pick it all back up at the point of reunification. Others want to comment on that?
I just have a short comment, is that I think it's worth always connecting with each other. I think with COVID, we've gotten very comfortable with virtual world and so scheduling meetings on Zoom. And I think a big important piece of that is not all our families that we're working with they're not on Zoom and they're not always on email. And so I think doing those in-person meetings with them, seeing them when you can, but then also supporting them getting to these places, I think is a big thing. And the best experience I've had in transporting families to where they need to be is building those relationships with them. You know, you get to talk about different things, you get to connect with them on different levels, and it becomes a more personable interaction. And I think that's something that speaks more than just phone calls, Zoom, Teams. And then I think the same in connecting with organizations too. You know, we've gotten so used to email and being away from each other that we're losing that personal connection. And I think it's really important. And I think just continuing to reach out to each other. And I'm always one that's always trying to build enough relationship with someone where I can pick up the phone and say, well, hey, call so-and-so at this agency if you need this, or call so-and-so over here if this is what you need, or, you know, building connections in that way. And I think just community organizing, like Laura said, events today, some things I did when I was at Division of Indian Work was had community events outside, and the purpose was, you know, all of us have these programs, but we don't always know what programs are out there. And so it's always important for us to continue to stay connected with each other so that our families and our people can know that we're here. You know, our agencies, organizations, and programs are here for them. Like that's who the funding and the grants are coming for. So it's important for us to support them in that way.
Bazi, did you want to add anything else?
I was gonna say, show up authentic with some good humor because we joke a lot. Like that guy, like that guy over there in that Thunder Bean sweater. Every time I meet him, he has some jokes. I would work with him.
I think we want to, oh, I'm sorry. I think we want to open it up for questions. We have a few minutes left and we'd love to answer questions. So I'm just, no pressure, but this is the time.
I do have to comment though. Nina is so cool. She was my old student. I was like, oh my God, like, and my students are here as well. And it's like, there's that moment when it's like, oh my God, look at that. I don't need to say anything. Y'all don't even need me no more. Now I just get to sit and listen to you talk. I'm so proud of her.
Oh. And you're a Metro State graduate, right? Yes,
Mhm.
that's right.
Right?
Does anyone have any questions?
I'd
One,
like-
oh,
I'd-
go ahead, sorry, Nick.
I'd like actually some statements. I'm looking at Carrie, I'm looking at Fenton in terms of your guys' work and your history working in partnership with the American Indian community. What are some of the lessons you've learned over the years?
Do we, we have, we can
Oh,
take
I
a
can-
mic too, yeah.
Switch you want to start or?
Turn it on when they talk.
You didn't know we were gonna do this. I
No,
didn't
the-
know we were gonna
The
do
fry
it.
bread just kicked in and I'm a little dopey, so the carbs. I would just say a couple of things. What I really heard you saying was relationship. It's all about relationship. And, we can use the word cultural connections over and over again. And if I'm not grounded in my own culture and see the value and what my ancestors imparted to me, then it's very hard for me to build that bridge to other cultures. And all of our work, regardless of who we are in this room, all our work is cross-cultural work. We're always working with someone from a different culture, different generation, from yourself. And one of the things that was lost in the boarding schools and in the relocations was that transmission from generation to generation of parenting lore. As Nick said, the show part, seeing how teenagers transition, how a teenage boy learns about his inner warrior, his inner man, his inner person, and how that happens, how it develops, how the family, how cousins and aunties and uncles, as well as parents and big brothers, help that along in healthy and natural and beautiful ways. And that's what was taken away. And when Nick says don't colonize, it's don't colonize because it doesn't work. Colonizing people is not going to get us where we want to go, where we need to go, where we need to go together. And the humility of partnering with our clients, Nina started off talking about strengths and acknowledging those strengths. It's not someone's fault that their grandma wasn't around to show them how to be a parent, how to be a mom, how to be a daughter, how to be an ancestor to the next generation. So the acknowledging those strengths, that we're not communicating to our people that they've done something wrong or there's something wrong about them, that they're intrinsically messed up. None of that is true. And we have a sacred role as social workers and as guides to help people along on the path, not to substitute our teachings for theirs, but just to be helpful, to be creative, to be kind, and to be honest. And we are bridge builders too, just like you all said. We can, we can help you survive in this world, but we really want you to thrive. And that's the part that your culture can do for you and that you can do for yourself. We can just nudge you along the way a little bit. And the last thing is not to get in the way. And that's, I think, that piece about not colonizing is, try to get out of the way as much as possible. We can connect people with each other. And as Nick said, now my student is off doing wonderful things. Maybe she'll talk to me every now and again. Maybe she'll ask me for advice in 10, 20 years time. That's great. But, to step out of the way, make the connection, impart a little bit of wisdom and knowledge we have and get the heck out of there. Stand by and let the good work begin or continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carrie? So one of the things coming up. So one of the things I do have to say, ancestry says I'm part Irish, and I think Fenton may be my relative.
I was just gonna say, like, I don't know if I would say anything different. Relationship was number one. Just making time, stopping what you're doing, whatever, I guess we get stuck in the busyness of having an agenda of we need to, whether it's checking the boxes, moving through the motions. So stopping, just like Fenton said, listening, like stop talking, just listen, focus on priority of building that relationship, because if you don't have that relationship, you don't have trust. And trust is, I guess that's my motivation, or that's my motivator is to reach that point, having that trust. From there, yeah, I think that's kind of where I focus on.
And Carrie works at Hennepin County with tribal transfers. So the cases that the county has, the jurisdiction has gone back to the tribe. And so she works specifically with the tribes and sort of we're looking at case planning and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, in those cases, the county remains financially responsible for the out-of-home placement costs of the children when they are still in foster care or other settings of placements. So I have to bridge the money issue, but also the needs of the children. So that's, with when I say focusing on the trust that I build with the folks that are working in the tribes as the case managers of these cases. The way that, I tell them, I try to show them that I am not there to monitor their work. I honor their work. I want them to see that in my responsiveness to them, that they are the ones that are doing this work and honoring these families and trying to help assist these families. And so hopefully my work is coming through of showing that.
And sometimes I think, we forget we move at the speed of trust, right? And sometimes it's slow. And sometimes I think we get caught up as social workers because we think because we have good hearts and our good intention, therefore everybody should just want to run to us and we can love them up and we can be good, right? Anybody else over here? Lessons learned in terms of working with American Indian communities? Partnering, collaborating?
I know everyone's tired after that big lunch.
I'm looking at my students. It's fun to me. Now they're Bucky. They talk mad smack in the classroom.
Anything else from the panelists that you'd like to add? I just want, no? Yes? Okay. Yes, please.
He was right there.
So just, I'm not a social worker, but just as like court staff, lay
Mhm.
person, can one of you touch on like specific, asks of the family that they would be, that would be considered like a colonizing behavior, something that I think maybe you were talking about? Sorry, I don't remember your name. But as a social worker, like, what are the things that you have to do as a social worker that is maybe gets resistance from the family? Like, what am I looking for when maybe there's pushback from like, the family, or does that make sense?
Mhm.
Maybe that's a loaded question.
It is loaded. So I think, the biggest thing, and I think that there's challenges with it too, coming from court and recommendations, of what others want to see the family, do, or how they want the parent to come out to be a parent. So to be honest, I think a case plan is very colonized. So it just is. It's a very colonized way to come about how to help and support them be who they are and to be the best person that they can be. So I think being open to, like I said, the creativity on how you can accomplish those goals. If you're gonna ask them to do a Rule 25 and to do substance use, it might take a little longer. So to come back and understand that those case plans can change. How can we be more creative? Are there other groups that they can attend? People that they can connect with advocacy? And I guess I don't have much more. I know there's much more you could do and could add. So if anybody else has any other examples, they can offer.
So as a case manager before for the county and now working for Shakopee, one of the things that I think that would help a lot is in the case plan, continually adding the line or culturally appropriate service. So then it gives the open-ended option for whatever the family deems best for themselves. So really just finding the spaces that you can add the autonomy for each individual. And you really should be doing it for any family in general, to find those options, because just because you believe it's right for your, like what you've seen or what you've experienced for yourself, it's not going to be right for every single person and their experiences. So add the autonomy and you'll get to healing.
I think one of the other things that we see on case plans a lot is about treatment programming. And it is hard because, you know, our system is set up for, you go, you get a chemical health assessment, and then, you know, you're recommended A, B, or C. There are a number of culturally specific and culturally diverse types of programming. And one of the things you'll see is like in the metro area, but also with the tribes, that programming a lot of the times is outpatient. And, you know, I think some of the reasoning for that, you know, there's different reasons depending on where you're looking, but it allows for a kind of flexibility, one, for people to still work if they need to. It allows for flexibility for folks to have care near their home and have culturally appropriate services nearby. And so a lot of times what I've heard things said about, well, this person needs inpatient treatment. But we've seen people be successful in any manner of ways. And I think really if they have a culturally appropriate assessor, that assessor is not necessarily going to recommend inpatient versus outpatient, but look at, you know, a few different programming types that might be helpful to the person. And the other thing that I think is tough is we have lots of families that, you know, sobriety is a long road, and treatment is not always the thing that gets them there. You know, sometimes it might be going to the sweat lodge or something else. And so I think we have to be open to where that person is, especially if they've been to a number of treatments. I mean, I have a particular client that I worked with for several years, and I think that she could probably teach any treatment course at any point. But the thing that's been most helpful to her is the cultural pieces and maintaining sobriety and connecting with other folks, and then eventually like peer mentoring, you know, as a way to maintain her sobriety too and keep going. And teaching on her own, not going to yet another treatment because she had a relapse, because that really hasn't been helpful. So.
Well, it kind of went along those lines. I was a relative care provider for my family. I've worked in this field, and I'm Dakota, and I found during being a support person in that services weren't being provided or accepted, what my cousin needed and asked for. They're like, well, what are that person's credentials, right? They want to, like, the court is asking for very specific things of families, that if you have a spiritual connection, or you're practicing your culture and that's how you're getting your mental health treatment, but it's not quite meeting those expectations, you know, try and get creative, be open-minded. And you know, I personally, I don't see doctors unless like my legs got to be falling off my body, right? And I kind of got put in a situation where I needed to present white because my daughter's school was following up if I took her to the doctor for something I had someone else see her for, right? And we were monitoring it in our way and using our medicines, and I was like, okay, I guess I have to do this, right? Like, and so just those things, like, ask, well, like, what does that look like for you? Because that's gonna get a whole different level of participation. I don't want to say compliance because that's a gross word, but participation and feel much less intrusive.
Can I say something about colonization? Right? Colonization is not only an Indian issue, it's all of our issue, right? Because one of the things, look at colonization in American culture, right? Are you happy? According to a lot of data, we are not a happy people. We are broke, we are fat, we're over medicated, right? This is not working out for us. So we need to think of a different way of coming about it. So, you know, one of the things I always challenge my students too is like, you know, what is American standard of beauty? Right? Blonde hair, blue eyes, size 0. And if you don't fit that, sorry, right? So resisting the urge of colonization is not just a person of color issue, it's everybody issue, right? We have to change the way we're sort of thinking about things so that we can have a different society, right? Right now, it's like, in order to survive here in the Twin Cities, you have to have nearly 2 jobs to get an apartment, right? That's problematic, right? And the cost of living has gone skyrocketing, you know, so it's not working out. So colonization's all our issues. Does that make
Thank you.
sense?
Well, we have to close for today, but I would just like to thank our wonderful panel and also thank all of you for coming and listening. Cassidy is right outside the door with certificates for those that need them. And thank you again for coming and joining our presentation.